I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. I'm so excited to be here with Susie Vaughn and Mary Webb. We're going to talk about essentially coaching leaders or leaders as coaches. And we're doing it because my friend and colleague, Mary Webb from the Instructional Coaching Group, said, you have got to talk to Susie Vaughn about how to be a good coach. So that's why we're here. We're going to hear lots about it. Mary, maybe you could say a little bit more about Susie, just so people know.
Yeah. So Susie Vaughn has been probably one of the most inspirational people that I've had in my journey. You know, when you think back to all of, like, as you get older and the journey gets longer, you think about those people that change the trajectory in which you go. Susie has been that for me. She came in right at that point of need, and with her wonderful experience. So Susie was a principal prior to becoming like a coach, and spent her remainder of her years working with principals and in leadership roles, just pushing us in our thinking and growing us. And my work with her was just pretty much, like I said, it just was transformational. So I'm so forever grateful that I had the opportunity to work with someone like Susie Vaughn. So that is quite an intro, Susie, but I think you are very worthy of that. And so,
Well, it was my privilege and is still my privilege to work with lots of great leaders. So thank you for that introduction.
So, Mary, why were you thinking this would be a topic we should discuss? I have my own answer to that question, but I'd
okay.
like your answer.
I'm curious if mine will hit some of your answers.
Right.
You know, in our work at ICG, we're in and out of schools and in and out of a lot of districts. And the principal always is the key for all improvement at
Right.
school, you know? And the role of principalship, I've been watching, you know, I've been outside of the principalship for a couple of years now. It's not getting any easier. The job is getting more and more complex. And I thought it was really important that we started having this conversation, because we've been having it, around the fact that principals can no longer bear the burden of always making the decisions. And when they need to start shifting out of that, I've got the answer, I'm going to fix it for you, into a more, well, I need to start building the capacity of the people around me, because they can't be everywhere. They can't make every decision because there's a ton of them in the day. And so that's why I felt like it was a really important time, because it's a need that we're seeing in schools. So that's why I reached out to you and said, Jim, let's have a discussion about this. So did I hit what you were going to say? I'm curious.
Well, yes, I think so, but I think what I would say along with that, we're going to get to you eventually, Susie, but we're going to have this conversation first. But what I would say before we get to it is often principals are out there without much support,
Right.
and so it's such a crucial role. It involves so many different things, and you're just supposed to figure it out on your own. And so to me, that's critical. That's what I thought was really important. That's why, in big part, we partnered with Growth Coaching International, so we can share all their great stuff about leaders as coaches. But what did it mean to you, Mary? And then Susie, you're next after this. But what did it mean to you to have a coach like Susie? What did she do for you?
First, you know, when I started working with Susie in the district I was in, we had coaches, but we didn't have a lot of clarity around what the coach does or what coaching looked like. And so I, just being, you know, in schools, you just kind of make it work with what information you have, and you create your own narrative of what it needs to look like. So I never really had a clear picture, really, of what coaching looked like, but I was expecting teachers to engage in it. And what Susie did is she allowed me to have an opportunity to feel that vulnerability, because I don't think you can really capture what vulnerability is until you're actually experiencing it.
Right.
And sit down with someone and say, I really want to talk around this issue. I know it could get better. And her asking questions and making me really think hard, I mean, really hard, around those things that I wanted to talk about. It really gave me an understanding of what I was expecting teachers to engage in and walking the walk of it. I really felt like that was the biggest thing. And then I saw the magic of it. I saw the growth that I was able to, like you said, you're alone. You're by yourself. And people look to you and say, so what's the answer? All the time. And, you know, that's the role that you're in. And so it is a little isolating. And so to have someone sitting there talking with you and asking you questions, you feel a camaraderie, right? First of all, someone right there with you. But it was just something that I felt like was really important, that if I asked teachers to do it, I needed to be doing it as well.
Well, it sounds like it's great to have the support, but it
Mm.
wasn't just a matter of having support. You also worked through some really important things, and you were more successful and more confident as a result of the coaching. Is that it?
Great way of summarizing that, yes.
Okay, Susie. After all that, as someone who spent much of your life coaching principals, what would you say? What are the critical elements of coaching leaders?
Okay, so I do want to say, I think you mentioned the International Coach Federation before, a little bit about, like, I am a certified coach through the international, I'm a PCC, a professional certified coach. And I think that is an essential component for us to do some learning around coaching. Now, everybody doesn't have to go through that rigorous of a training program, but I do think that some of the things your company is offering really is that, for me, that a principal or a leader needs to have that foundational knowledge that Mary was talking about. I really didn't know what a coach looked like until I started coaching with Susie. Now, I would say that that feedback that Mary gave before about this being, you know, building confidence, helping her think more deeply, the idea around building the capacity in other people. I heard her use the word magic, which I love. And I wouldn't say that that's because that's not really necessarily even about me as a person, but me as a coach and what a coach can do for a leader. So when I think about those essential skills, beyond having an idea that what coaching is and isn't, is really, I think all leaders must be learners. So having that growth mindset for not only themselves, which again, Mary alluded to the fact, if I'm going to ask my teachers to learn and grow in this way, I feel an obligation to learn and grow myself as well. So it is that idea around about learning enough about coaching and in order to do it well. And I think some of the things that work against us as leaders when we aren't really thinking about leading with that coach like mindset is that the things that have made us successful up to this point, such as, being a good problem solver, being decisive, being able to make decisions, being able to tell people what to do, you kind of have to put some of that aside if you're going to be a coach like leader. And so that's a big, hard change for some people to really say, do I want to shift from this old way of leadership into a new way of leadership, even though now and especially now that we have some science, neuroscience and some, data behind the fact about coaching is working and why coaching works.
We're actually offering something very similar to the International Coaching Federation, which is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. They're sort of the two big organizations to do coaching. So with our partnership with Growth Coaching, they offer a certification program so people can become certified. And I think you're on to something really important. Sometimes I think people think coaching is, I'm just going to get together and talk about stuff and tell you what to do. And once you go through some kind of rigorous training around coaching, you realize, maybe just telling people what to do, giving them advice isn't necessarily the best thing. How do you go? One of the things that Mary told me is you really do a great job of helping people reflect and not jumping in to do quick fixes and tell them what to do. Sort of, why do you do that and how do you do it? I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay. So what I would say is that starts, I love that question because it made me think, oh, I don't know. Why do I do it and what do I do? Is that it starts with the coaching agreement. And a coaching agreement to me is making sure that we have a common understanding about what coaching is and what coaching isn't.
Mm.
And so before I even start working with someone, we have that conversation that's outside of that or prior to that first coaching session to say, this is what coaching is. And I am not going to give you advice. I am not going to be the fixer. I'm not going to answer your questions. I'm going to probably answer your questions with a question that, forces you, and I use that word kindly, but pushes you into thinking a little bit more deeply about the situation. And Mary and I have talked about the idea that when I come up with a solution, it's my solution to the problem as I perceive it. It's not your solution. And again, like I work outside of the districts where the leaders work. And so I don't know the players. I don't know the dynamics of the district. I don't know a lot of things that could influence the decision. So sometimes when leaders will say, "What do you think I should do?" My answer is, "It depends."
Mm.
Oh,
Which I did all the time. I would
yeah.
look at her and go, "Okay, Susie, I'm tapped out. What do I do?" And she was so masterful. I didn't mean to interrupt with
And
No, that's
the
great.
thing. I always felt like her questions would almost lift a veil of a dimension. Like when I struggle with a question, I get really centered on the problem, and her questions would get me to think around the problem. I would, you almost get tunnel vision when you're struggling with something at school. And I would want to talk about that problem through that little narrow view. And her questions really made me think around it and think through it. And a lot of times I go, "Oh, that was a really good question you just asked me, Susie. I didn't think of it that way." When she didn't really tell me anything, she just asked a question. But it helped me. Now, was it tiring and hard? Yeah. But, and I learned very quickly that if I asked her, "Just tell me the answer," which I know teachers want. They want the answer a lot of times. We're kind of trained that way. She would smile at me very sweetly, and then she would ask me another question. So I didn't mean to jump in, Susie, but I just feel like that was really important. That was such a strength of yours in our conversations.
Yeah, and that takes discipline on the part of the coach, and I think, again, regardless of what training program that you go through, there is a lot of intentional practice, in order to really be fluid with those skills around listening and asking questions and paraphrasing. Um, One point I wanna make, and I meant to make it in the last question, but is the idea that not every conversation is a coaching conversation. And I say that a lot to people because sometimes teachers do need the answer. Sometimes they need direction, and that's maybe more in the mentoring or supervising situation. So if there's a nuance too of deciding, is this a coaching conversation? Because I might be able to answer a black and white question about a process or a due date, but if I want to build capacity in someone, a coaching conversation is typically a better way to build for the future.
That's a
So
really good point, Susie. I was in a training with some principals last week, and one of the principal goes, "Okay, this all sounds well and good, Mary." He goes, "But is this in every conversation I do? I have to show up this way?" And so you just answered that because they really go there. They're like, "Oh, so I have to abandon my old way of talking and having a conversation instead of I could select which one might be the best path." He was like, "So everything has to be that way?" And I kind of wish Susie was there. She answered it so much better than I did.
Well, again, I bet people are tired of hearing me say not every conversation's a coaching conversation. But on the flip side to that, I had a conversation yesterday when I said, if you start with coaching conversations and you get the sense that this person really doesn't know the HR policy or the special ed procedure or how to do the impact cycle, then then you step out of coaching and you guide them, So it's not like you have to say, I can't move in and out of coaching. But if I start with coaching, maybe the person does have already has the skills and I'm going to support them in growing even more. If they don't have the skills, I'm going to step out and make sure they have the knowledge they need to be successful.
like my friend Krishna Van Oerberg says is, if somebody pulls up in their car and they say, "Hey, can you give me directions to City Hall?" They don't want you to say, "Well, other times you've tried to find landmarks. What's work for you?" They want you to tell you how to get there. And
Right.
there are situations where you have to do that. And then other things like maybe shaping culture. If someone's a toxic force in the culture, or at least not consistent with your values, sometimes you have to deal with that directly, or they're acting unprofessionally. You have to deal with that directly. My other little metaphor is if you imagine a quarterback, we'll just pick Patrick Mahomes because I know Mary's a big Chiefs fan, but she was at the Chiefs game on Monday, actually.
I was.
You're not
In
really
the
a
rain.
Chiefs fan. I
In
don't
the
want
rain.
to put that on you. Are you Dallas?
Well, I have to be true to Dallas if I'm living in Dallas and my husband is a Cowboy fan. So yes, I like to embrace all teams,
Right.
especially the winning ones. The Chiefs right now.
If you're a Dallas fan, that would make sense. But at any rate, so Patrick Mahomes goes back. He reads the defense, and then he has a plan, but he might change his plan. He has a repertoire of things he could do. Maybe he's going to do a shovel pass to the tight end, or maybe he's going to air it out, or maybe he's going to run. But he has to look at the situation, respond in kind. He doesn't run the same play every time. And to me, that's kind of how coaching works. It's maybe a smaller number of plays, but in some situations when it has to be dealt with directly, you deal with it directly. Other situations, I'm building capacity. If I fix it for you, I inhibit your ability to learn and grow. That's kind of how I see it.
One more point, Jim, about reflection, that I think coaching is extremely valuable. Say Mary and I have a conversation and she makes a decision about how she's going to move forward. 2 weeks later, when I talk to her, I check in and say, how did that go? That conversation with a parent or with a teacher or whatever it was. And she says, it went great. And we celebrate that. Right. And that it shows her, okay, I have one more tool in my toolkit. Or she comes back and she says, oh my gosh, it was a disaster. And then as a coach, I say, okay, let's dissect that. Let's look at what happened and what you might want to do differently, because we learn from reflecting on our practices more than just experiencing things. And so I think when you asked, I think reflection is really an essential part of coaching. And most of us don't take the time to reflect unless we're put in a situation that, puts it front and center, kind of holds up the mirror for us.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes we're so wrapped up in the situation
I'm sure.
that it's hard to think. Like if my I don't know, if I've got something, if I stub my toe, it's hard for me to think about how my fingers feel because I'm worried about my toe. But you get so wrapped up in things that you don't. It's hard to think about them. And so what coaching can do, it can disrupt the pattern. It can create a place for reflective thinking. Then you can ask questions like, what advice would you give to somebody else in that position? That gives you some distance. You step back and you go, oh yeah, and so it gives people a distance, and then it gives them a chance to look at the situation from different perspectives. And then of course you can turn it into an action plan. You can say, now that we've looked at this from different perspectives, what are we going to do? So that's a cool thing. How do you keep from jumping into fix-it mode? I've worked with, I don't know, maybe 100,000 coaches now, and everybody struggles, it seems. I'm sure there are a few that don't, but with once we get this coaching over with, I'm going to tell you what you need to do. Like, I mean, they really feel like they want to fix the problem. And I know exactly what you need. If you take this pill, if you do this thing, it's going to fix you. How do you keep yourself from not going into fix-it mode?
Again, I think that's like the discipline part of it.
Right.
And for me, when I first started thinking about it, like I thought when I first started training, I was like, I'm a great listener. And then you start looking at committed listening and distractions, external and internal distractions to listening. And then you're like, oh, I'm not a very good listener after all. So I honestly think I've been coaching principals. I was a principal myself, then the training, and I've been coaching for 9 years. It's the discipline of walking into a coaching situation, knowing what your role is. You're the coach. That's what I'm there for, not just what I'm supposed to do. That's who I am in that moment. So I do think that there's discipline in listening deeply, um, continuing to ask questions. And then I will say that little person who does the advice monster, or the person who knows, oh, I got the great solution because when I was in that situation, I did XYZ, is I have a little mantra in my head that says, it doesn't matter what you think.
I like
And
that.
so like when I want to say, well, Mary, I think you should, do this. I'm like, this thing pops up in my head and it's like, it doesn't matter what you think. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. It doesn't matter what I think. So that idea around staying curious, which sounds easier than it actually is, and saying, I'm just going to keep asking questions and paraphrasing and using my coaching skills to help that person find the solution that's best for them. Because I know that even being out of public education for 9 years, it doesn't matter what I did or what I thought I should do. It's a whole new ballgame since I left in 2015. So the idea of it doesn't matter what I think. And then the other, the other like tagline that comes up is that idea about coaching the person, not the problem.
Mm.
And I'm sure you've heard that somewhere, or I've read it somewhere, and I'm not sure, the source on that, but it's the idea that it's not my job to coach the problem. It's my job to coach the person to get clarity about the problem and potential solutions.
So let's just say hypothetically, you drifted into telling the person what they should do, giving them advice. Why would you want to avoid that? I mean, we've sort of just jumped into we need to avoid it, but what's the advantage of not jumping into fixing the person and solving the problem? Why would we avoid that, do you think?
Well, I think when we think about why coaching, that kind of goes into, I wrote some notes about like why coaching works is because I am your thought partner and I am creating what you said before. We don't always get the chance to think deeply about something. We have 100 decisions a day that we have to make, and you go from as a leader from one thing to the other. So I guess I just take it very seriously that that's my role. And I know I'm slipping when I start to ask questions, and I've heard it come out of my mouth. I ask leading questions, and so we all slip sometimes into thinking, well, I know exactly what she should do. And then so if I hear a question come out of my mouth that doesn't sound quite right, I'll be like, oh, wait, I have to back up. And then really I give myself sort of, I think you said disrupting, the events is I just sort of have to disrupt myself in that moment. But I think the idea that coaching creates the space for deeper thinking, I know that. I know that's where the magic happens. And so I don't find myself falling into that trap nearly as often as I did when I first started coaching.
What were the advantages for you, Mary, that even though probably Susie wanted to give you advice and probably you wanted to have the advice, but you didn't go there, what was the payoff or benefit for you?
Well, it's something we talk about a lot is like I owned it then. It's easy for someone to solve it for me. And then I'm always going to say, so what did you do next? And then what did you do next? I like pull myself out of being a problem solver. So Susie was able, like being in that coaching situation. I mean, I brought some big problems that as a normal leader, I would go, I'm just not going to deal with that right now because there's so many issues that you deal with every single day because those were the hard things that you could find an excuse not to address. Like maybe it was a team that just isn't cohesive and they never have been. And I'm like, well, that's just who they are. I can't change that. There's nothing I can do for them. And those were the things I brought forward because I had the time and like a protected space. And she didn't really know all those situations, the dynamics of the things I was coming forward
Right.
with, wanted to talk about. And so I felt like when I had ownership, I was more excited to do it because that's not fun work to deal with maybe a team that's not cohesive.
Right.
When it was my idea, you have a little more energy, and ready to, and I think the payout is I actually did it as opposed to, oh, that's a great idea, Susie. And then as she walks out, I'm like, well, maybe I won't do that. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It turns into I will do it because I've thought of all of the nuances and I'm ready to have a go at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That idea of ownership is really important, isn't it? That I'm the one who solved my problem. I don't need somebody else. Because what Michael Bungay Stanier says this, like, when I solve the problem for the coachee, what I'm doing is saying, well, I know you can't do it, so I'll fix it for you. It's empowering. And, yeah.
You know what I discovered too with that, Jim, is like as I was experiencing the fact that she wasn't going to help me solve my problems, I love solving people's problems. And I think that comes with the job of principal. Sometimes you're like, I'm going to solve everything. And then, so I gave advice like you wouldn't believe. But then I almost would get offended when people wouldn't take my advice.
Well, they don't usually. Yeah.
Right, they don't. And so why are you spending your time giving advice instead of shifting the conversation to get them to do the solutions?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. That's why I love the advice question. What advice would you give somebody else in your situation? Because you get to give yourself advice. So you still get to give yourself, you do the advice.
Right.
So if you had a principal, this is a question for both of you, but maybe you could answer it first, Susie. If you had a principal who was interested in the coaching approach, but a little fearful about it because they didn't want to give up the top-down model of leadership, how would you approach that? What advice would you give the principal, maybe? Oh, so we're giving advice right away.
I know. I was like, wait a minute. And yeah. Um, well, I did think about this question because I guess I told Mary jokingly that I have lost my ability to tell people what to do. And I say that kind of jokingly, but kind of seriously after 10 years or 9 years of full-time coaching, that it's very difficult for me to tell people what to do. But what I would say to someone who was looking at this as sort of intrigued by coaching would be, again, a little bit of educating yourself. And you don't have to take a, 6-month long course, but educating yourself on why coaching works and how you could use it to positively impact not only your own work life, but the success of your campus. You could actually achieve what you want to achieve by engaging more people in the process. So I think that goes to a leader's vision for their campus and really sort of helping that person paint a picture of what that vision could be. And if I were able to capitalize on all of these people and empower these people, then there's no stopping me. So I think when I think about that, it's building like that positive energy toward wanting to change my leadership style. And I think that the other piece that we touched on a little bit in the last question was the idea when we're clear about our actions, we're at our highest level of motivation to do something about it. And so when Mary said, yeah, Susie tells me to do it, she walks out the door and I say, maybe or maybe not. But I thought of this idea and now I'm super energized to do it. So if somebody's ready to coach, then they're energized, hopefully, to do some of the things that it would take. So on a more concrete level, I think about starting small. Like, you talked about a little bit about I'm looking at the Coaching Habit book,
Read
and
that book,
I
yeah.
know that's it's simple yet very complex, of course, to implement. But the idea that you could start small with a trusted colleague and say, I want to kind of try this out. I want to try out these coaching questions. I want to see what it feels like to say, what's on your mind and what else? And what's the biggest challenge here for you? And, that can get you a long way into a conversation, just those three simple questions. Um, and then the other thing that I think about is after trying that with somebody, like if I could just say, if you have an AP that you want to grow their capacity and you have a good relationship, just, play around with this coaching thing and try it out, see how it feels, reflect on how that conversation feels differently than a previous, directive conversation. Was the outcome better? And then I think they have to get a win, like, they have to see that the outcome was better, And I, quickly will tell you that I had a leader that I did that with when I was in my coach training, and this is the evolution as I see it, the short version. Person as a leader at my campus has a scenario, comes to me, tells me, and says, "What should I do?" And I say, "I think you should." Right? That was the principal line of mine 15 years ago or whatever. So, with some coaching and some attention and conversations, the next time it's, here's the scenario, what should I do? And my question is, what are you considering doing?
Mm.
And she the next time comes back and say, here's the situation, what should I do? But here's what I'm considering doing because I know you're going to want me to come with some possible solutions. The win is when she comes and says, this is what happened on my team. This is how I handled it. I just wanted you to know.
Mary, what's your take on that question? Somebody's kind of enamored of the top down, but then they think they should do the coaching. What advice would you give them?
I understand it completely, the top down, because there's so many factors for a principal. Like the role is so huge, time is a huge thing. Top down feels faster and more efficient. But I think it goes back to what I said earlier. I feel like if a principal's curious about being a coach and what that would look like in that conversation, why don't you flip it and you become the coachee and you see what that feels like for you? Because when I was able to feel it for myself and say, okay, because I always said as a leader, I'm building capacity of the teachers on my campus, but I was building the capacity of them through the way that I thought they should go. I was leading the path. I wasn't giving a lot of choice. And so when I pulled back, it wasn't as sustainable. And if I would have provided more choice, had more of a coaching approach to their development, I imagine it would be a little more sustainable. So I would always encourage a principal to try out what it feels like first and feel that energy and the ownership that comes from that. And then reflect on that and say, is that what you want your teachers to feel when you want them to move forward in their development? And also thinking about the fact that I always tell principals this, that we're almost firemen every day when we go to school because you never know
Yeah.
the fires you're putting out all day long. And if you like being in the fireman role, that's the top-down approach. I'm gonna put the fire out for you on every single thing that comes your way. But if you don't feel like you have enough time in the day because the fires are always gonna be there, what do you need to do next? And it really is, how am I gonna shift my conversations away from top-down to building capacity so other people can put the fires out or prevent them from happening altogether? Because I think that's the biggest thing. Principals get caught up in that minutia of the day to day, like top down. There's an issue here, there's an issue down the hall, and they can't get out of it. And they say, oh, coaching's great, but I don't have time for that right now. And so they're never going to allow themselves that time until they kind of pause and try it out.
And Nancy Klein's book about that is called Time to Think. We have to take time to think. That's the idea. I love what you said. If you want to learn how to be an effective coach, be coached by an effective coach. That might be a big step forward. Okay, one last question. What else would you like to add that we haven't addressed? Something that's on your mind where you say, I think it's important to say this about principals as coaches. Anything you'd like to share? And Susie, you're nodding your head, so I'm going to go with you first.
Okay. Well, what's funny? Somewhere in my notes here, it said, "What's the first thing a principal should do?" And I said, "Get a coach." Because again, I think if you have a coach, you
Right.
learn how to coach and you learn the positive impact of coaching. But I think the thing that I is critical is that if I if you believe in or embracing coaching as a leadership style, I strongly believe that it will make principal leadership more sustainable.
Mm.
Because when you're the firefighter every day, like Mary described, it's easy to get burned out. And it's easy to say, I don't have anybody in my camp. I have to do it all. I'm the first one here, the last one to leave. And so I also believe that there are people that want to step up. There are people who want to take leadership roles. And if a principal towards all of those opportunities, we are keeping other people from learning and growing, and we're not building that pipeline of leadership capacity for the future. So I think when we share leadership, we we really are making ourselves more effective and efficient leaders, and we're also building other people's capacity, which is what we want for our students. In our student success, our school success, all of that, but we can't do that alone. And if there's a way to have conversations where people can see that light, I think that will really help them see that there's another way to do things, and there's quite likely a way that's healthier for us and more effective than what we're doing if we're flying solo as leaders.
Mary,
That
what
was
do you want? Thank you so much. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, that was great, Susie. I was sitting here going, yes, yes, and yes. I think too, we talk a lot about coaching culture and building that in your buildings, and a principal's key to that. I mean, they're the one that's really facilitating the growth of others. And so to say I have a coaching culture in my school, what does that look like for you? And so what does that look like for all the people in the building, not just for the teachers you deem need coaching, right? We don't want a deficit model. We want more of an asset-based. So how do you make coaching visible for all to see? And I think that would be something I would love for principals to think about is like, if you're being coached, how do you make that visible so that people know that you're doing that? They see the safety in that, like my leader's doing it, I'm going to do it as well. And so that's something that I'm curious about too for leaders.
Yeah, I think of you can't do this maybe in a high school with 200 teachers. Maybe you could, but or 100 teachers, but in a smaller school, maybe you could think about. I see myself as nourishing the growth of every professional and
Mm.
consequently every student, and so every interaction I have is either nourishing or not nourishing, and coaching is a vehicle for doing that. If you can remember to do it and remind yourself to do it.
Right?
Well, I'm really grateful to both of you. I think this is such an important thing that we made this partnership with growth coaching so we can emphasize it more and more. Your comments, Susie, about the power of certification, of understanding what coaching really is, I think that's so important because um, once you start to experience it through your activities and learn from the educators you're learning with, it does become. I don't know if I've gotten out of the advice giving habit. I love that acronym for Michael Bungay Stanier because it's AGH. But the advice giving habit. But I don't know if I gotten out of it. But I'm getting a little bit better bit by bit. And coaching will take you away from that. So thank you so much, both of you, for being a part of the conversation. I love it.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks,
Thank
Susie. It's
you.
been wonderful seeing you again.
I know. I appreciate it. And I'm honored that you all reached out to me. So thank you for your time. And I'm excited about the work that you continue to do to spread coaching further into educational organizations.
Hey, you're one of Mary's heroes, which makes you one of our heroes. So I'm very, very grateful.
Oh,
Thank you
well,
so much.
thank you so much. And again, I always feel like it's such a privilege to coach people, to walk along with them because of that, like that vulnerability. And, it's honest. It's an intimate relationship in really hearing what people are thinking and some of their fears and hopes. And so I really do feel like it's a privilege. And thank you again for allowing me to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you too, Mary.
All right. Thanks, Jim.